Sustainability in Television Production. My name's Perelandra and I'm going to be chairing the panel today. I'm not expecting to do very much because we've got such exciting contributors here. I'm very much going to leave the talking to them. We have got until 2:30, which sounds like an awful long time, but it will, if you've been to any of these discussions, they're usually so rich, it'll fly by. But I will give you some gentle time reminders if it looks like we're running over, and obviously I'll try and leave a little bit of time at the end if any of our guests want to ask any questions. So very interesting, and it feels very pertinent topic today, talking about sustainability in production in the second week of talking about television in all its guises and all its research aspects. Obviously the making of television is how we all get to watch these wonderful programs that we get to analyse and research. So we have with us Steve Smith, who is a programme maker working for, is it Zero Productions? As I say, I had a
Picture Zero.
Picture Zero. I had a pad with all my notes on and someone just walked off with it. So it's now just freeform jazz. But what I thought would be really great would be to, if you could kick us off, Steve, really, to be talking to us about your journey into making sustainable productions, the challenges, and then obviously, hopefully, some of the rewards, and perhaps what has inspired you to work in this way. So I'll hand over to you, and of course, please do introduce yourself and tell everyone a little bit about your background as well.
Brilliant. Well, good afternoon and really good to be here. So my name's Steve Smith. I come from a directing background. That's what I've done my entire career. I've pretty much worked in every genre except drama. And I'm probably best known for directing the Graham Norton show, which I did for 22 years, which is quite frightening when you see how quickly time flies. But I've also been very concerned about climate change for quite some time. And I've had a particular worry about the way our industry, or the role our industry has in kind of helping address climate change. So about 10 years ago, when Albert formed, and for those that might not know, Albert is the home of sustainability for the film and TV industry in the UK. I sort of contacted them and sort of said, how can I help? What can I do? So I became a part-time, in my spare time, a sort of sustainability trainer. So one of the things that I've been doing for the last sort of 10 years is training our industry, both on sustainable production techniques, so how to reduce emissions in production, and editorial storytelling. Now, of those two roles, I think we all have to reduce our emissions. That's the law in the UK. We have to get to net zero by 2050 at the very latest. So I take that as a given that our industry has to do that. But obviously, it's challenging and people need help and support over how they can do that. But actually, the thing that I think is most important is the role our industry plays in supporting that transition to sustainability through informing audiences. We've got lots of social media, which obviously dominates, but actually film and TV still is one of the main sources of information and entertainment for the public. And as I've been training the industry for nearly 10 years, I recognize that still the public actually have quite a shallow understanding of climate change beyond the fact that it's a crisis. They don't really know a lot of the science or a lot of the details or the solutions. So I think the role our industry has in normalizing sustainable actions and showing people solutions is so vital, because scientists tell us we need to halve emissions within the next decade, by the end of this decade rather, and I don't think that's possible without behavior change. So that's what I think is crucial. And so one of the things I did is also set up Picture Zero Productions a couple of years ago. So one of our first productions was a documentary called The People versus Climate Change, which followed UK citizens going on the first ever citizens' assembly on climate change. And it was so fascinating because these were 108 random members of the public chosen through a sort of lottery system that didn't really know very much about climate change before they went on this process. And by going through that, they got really good climate education, but all of them came out engaged and feeling a sense of agency. I often hear people saying, what can I do as an individual to solve climate change? It's too complicated. But actually, education is key to that. And when people understand what the solutions are, there's so much we can do. So that's really powerful. So now I have this role. I stopped directing the Graham Norton show. I now kind of do consultancy around editorial storytelling, supporting the industry to that transition to net zero, and still trying to make content around this. So that's what I think is important.
Thank you. Kind of adding to that, can I ask a question? In terms of, I know that this year BAFTA Albert are doing a lot more work around storytelling and how we can start to thread through those stories of sustainability in productions. From a production point of view, are there compromises? You're a director. Are there compromises or challenges in terms of the way we make programmes? How are you, when you go and consult on projects, how are you discussing that, and what are the things that you've learned along the way? Because obviously they could in terms of things like locations and props, lots of things that have got quite a big carbon footprint. Actually, if we're asking creatives to make some changes which might not in the first instance feel supportive of a creative vision, how are you cutting through that, Steve?
It's challenging. I mean, if I'm very honest, behavior change is kind of crucial to this. So training helps. So everyone in our industry can access free training with Albert, which I think gives you some of the sort of basics. Although one of the things that I sometimes worry about is I don't think we're always reaching crew. I think we train production management and producers quite well, but I think we could do more with kind of reaching crew. And I think actually what you realize is we're quite set in our ways in terms of how we make things. And I think that's a sort of security blanket that we all have. So for me, it's trying to encourage people to sort of think about the exciting opportunities of trying to think of doing things new. There are some great advances that are happening. So in big areas like sort of generation, for example, electric generators are now starting to come online. So there are solutions to these things. And also, I think we need to think about being more collaborative, so that we don't waste things like props and sets, because traditionally our industry just throw these things away at the end of a production. And that's just crazy. It's bonkers, isn't it? And also, there's never been a better time to try and find ways of reducing our energy demands, because in the middle of a cost of living crisis and an energy crisis, energy costs are tripling. That's a huge pricing inflation for production. So if we can find ways of reducing our energy demands, we're going to have more money to spend on screen and less money to spend on energy. So there are lots of things there. The area that I'm really focused on, though, is storytelling. And I would ask everyone to sort of think about a couple of things. First of all, we live in a world of climate crisis. Portugal, I think, have announced today, aren't they, that they're concerned that for the next 10 days there could be forest fires, and they're on an alert for that because of these temperatures. We've seen in India and Pakistan, temperatures hitting 50 degrees this year. We see earlier this year our country's infrastructure damaged through storms and communities being cut off from the power supply. This is our new normal. So I would sort of say that when you look at the kind of stuff on our screen, that we don't often reflect this enough. So the world we now reflect on screen isn't the world we actually live in anymore. So that, I think, is important, and we have to change that. And so I would just start to ask people, think about these simple things. If you're a writer, just take a moment to pause. How do the characters in your script relate to climate change? If they're an older character, are they people that might be climate skeptic? And if they are, do we portray that as a negative character trait? Are they people concerned about their children or their grandchildren? And how does that come across? If they're a mother or a kind of father, are they suffering climate anxiety for their kids? And how do we kind of portray that in storylines? What do people look like on screen? Have they changed the clothes they wear? Are they now buying secondhand or charity shop clothes? And if so, how does a wardrobe department reflect that change of the way people dress? Have people changed their eating habits because of climate change? Are people starting to be more vegetarian and more vegan? And how can we portray that on screen? So I think there are lots of messages. The big message I would have is that a few years ago, I was arguing that we needed more programs about climate change. I still think we can have programs about climate change, but I'm not sure that's the answer. What I think is the answer is how we reflect climate messaging in all our contemporary content. And actually, I think we're far better off trying to get these kind of messages into programs like our soaps, our EastEnders, the shows that we love and watch and audiences come to, because we do know that audience figures for specials on climate change are often not as big as audience ratings for these kind of bigger shows that we love. So that's my big thought, I think.
Thank you so much. I'm sure that we're going to keep coming back to you, because I know I've certainly got lots of questions. I could talk to you for hours. Obviously, my background is that I teach production, and I was formerly worked as a producer, director, and production manager. So I'm fascinated to hear you speak, Steve. But I'm really conscious that Manel and Marta have been doing some research on this topic. So I thought it might be a good point to bring you guys in, so you could tell us a little bit about the work you've been doing. And I believe you've also interviewed Steve, so it'd be really nice to hear about that project. So whoever would like to jump in first.
Thank you very much. I'm gonna jump first. Well, it's a pleasure to be here with you. Unfortunately, I'm not in the UK, where I know you have a sunny day, a very warm day. But fortunately, we can connect through the internet, so it's fantastic. Yes, I'm also glad to say hello to Steve. He was very inspiring for us. He's still very inspiring for us. And I'm going to introduce how we started to work on what we call green shooting, and what is green shooting for us, because it's a concept linked with what we have been dealing with a minute ago. But we have an orientation to be applied here in the Spanish market. So we are both lecturers in the Department of Communication. We have been working on television series for a long time, but this is the first time we tackle a subject related with climate change, even social change. We want to include this perspective on our work. And it actually came because our university has an initiative called Planetary Wellbeing, promoting different actions on research and teaching devoted to help the sustainability of the planet in terms of obviously climate change, but also in terms of equity, in terms of democracy, etc. So among the different sub-initiatives that this program run, we applied to one which was focused on promoting the change in the creative and cultural industries. So we had some previous works on the television industry related to that, but they were quite embryonic. So we started to explore about that. We actually applied for a call in this initiative, and we got a fund to do a research on that. It was a quite applied research, so we did several interviews, some panels, and also some articles and recommendations on that. And we are also working right now in a more applied project, which is the documentary on the climate change assembly in Spain. We are producing this film. We are working with a very well-known filmmaker here, an independent filmmaker called Eva Vila. So we are applying all this theory to this film at this moment. We have also some, as I said before, some recommendations for the industry. We are trying to connect all the pertinent and active stakeholders on that, from the Academy of Cinema and Television in Spain and Catalonia. You know that the audiovisual industry in Spain is quite federal in that sense, and there are some specific organisms in every region. So we are working with them. We are working also with the associations of producers. We are working with directors, and we are working with schools as well to give some guidelines to them to introduce the culture of green shooting. And especially I myself, I'm a teacher of production, so I'm trying to apply all this basic principles to the productions we do in school, we do in the university during the training of the students. This is very quickly the project that brings us to this panel today, and I'm going to give the floor to Marta, who's going to explain a bit more about green shooting and how we understand this concept. Thank you.
Hi, Manel. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having us here today. Well, I think Manel did a great job explaining, where the project came from. Obviously, I feel like everyone here knows about green shooting. It's basically, sustainable practice in the audiovisual industry. In terms of research, we've been trying to know where Spain is at right now, in comparison, for instance, with the UK. And so what we have been finding is that the UK has way more regulations, as Steve assertively said. There's BAFTA Albert, but there's Julia Cycle, so there are many entities that are already working on it. And I think the industry is really pushing for it. I know ITV is currently, applying sustainable managers. So I feel that it is very pushed in the UK industry, while in Spain is still very much an individual practitioner that, has that motivation. And so what we have been studying and seeing is that it's now trying to be pushed by the ministry to have it as a mandatory thing to get funded, because I don't know how much are we going to talk about funding, but in many aspects we have public televisions that's funded by the ministry, so it's not private people or producers like it can be in the US. And so Spain is still kind of behind it. There's a few practitioners doing it, but finally we're seeing a trend of ministry and entities like CONCA, which is the Council for Arts in Catalonia, trying to push for it. However, it's still a very much slow market. Another part of the research we're trying to see is which is the role that celebrities have on promoting this. So far we know, like, Leonardo DiCaprio, that's this movie of like Don't Look Up, and great, it's about climate change, like Steve correctly said that the content is about climate change, but there is not that much buzz around how a film is made and how actually the industry they're contributing in is polluting. And so we have kind of found two phenomena in like where a person that is unknown becomes well known for their action within climate change, which could be Greta Thunberg, or on the other hand, we find people that are famous and become more famous for their climate change line of thought, like Shailene Woodley. However, all of these are very related to climate change, but not to the industry. So we want to know what celebrities are not pushing that forward. We have seen that in New York, I'm pretty sure everyone knows here, Emily O'Brien, Earth Angel, Sets Production have been trying to make a program, which it's called Advocates, to promote that kind of landscape or sphere where famous people are talking about it, but still is not quite there yet. And so we're trying to explore and research why is that. Is it because the producers don't want people to know about this? Is because even the own celebrities don't know how much they are polluting? Because we know that like many big productions like Sony, Pixar are promoting sustainability productions, but why it's not being talked about is one of our main research questions that we are currently working in terms of research. And I completely agree with the last point that Steve made on, I don't still think that we have to produce content that explains climate change. But I think one of the main things is, especially in television series, which is our field of expertise, we need to incorporate messaging that is obviously not paternalistic, and it's not, going to be pushy for audiences, but that promotes sustainable in all the areas. I think we haven't talked about economic in here. We have talked about social and environmental. I think economy plays a huge role as well. We need to, try to make our productions as economic or circular as possible. So yeah, I think that's where our research is at the moment.
So Marta, could I ask, you were talking about the role that public service broadcasters play, and obviously in the UK the Albert scheme was originally created by the BBC. It was then gifted to BAFTA, and increasingly what we're seeing is when production companies go to pitch ideas, and this is something that Steve will be very familiar with, there's an expectation that you will be making productions that are sustainable as possible. Is there a similar kind of approach in the country you're researching? Do you think that is that going to be one of your recommendations that comes out of your research? Because I think policy and also we're talking, you mentioned about funding. Ultimately people want to be paid to make programs, and if a barrier to getting those commissions is that they're not engaging with sustainable program making practice, that is often the way things get moved along. Hearts and minds, great, but often it's well, if I can't get my production commissioned, I'm really going to have to start thinking about this. So do you see that then, is there a move in where you're doing real research, or is this something you think it needs to happen? Is this going to be one of your recommendations?
So we're now kind of finishing up an article where there is advocacy recommendations for the industry, and one of them is pushing to have, like, as a mandatory thing, sustainability in your productions, from having females and the diverse minorities like LGBT or even race, like in the 10% quota in high positions, to have a plan for environmental impact and for return on the local economy. So we are trying to push for that. Right now it's actually seen as kind of a reward, like if you have it you get more points, but it's still not mandatory, and so we want to push it for mandatory. Said that, as you said, unfortunately money is what makes people change behavior, but I don't think it should be only punishable. I think we also should strike for rewarding. And so one of our other recommendations is to maybe include into the prices of film and television industry a reward for those that are green productions or sustainable productions, so that it's equally balanced. Because researchers have said that the most hard thing to change is behavior on people regarding climate change and regarding sustainability. So you don't want to do it just by punishing behavior. You want to do it by both of it, so that it's equal and the actual behavior is inner rather than outer from the exterior. Yeah,
it's really interesting. I mean, I know in the UK, we've previously had quite a lot of success with offering kind of tax breaks to productions to do with where they go and film, and that's quite a well-established model now. And it certainly, to me, seems like that's that should be the direction of travel with sustainability. I do feel quite a lot of compassion towards production companies, though, because it's almost like budgets are ever shrinking in production, or they are in a lot of productions. Not all, I know, but for a lot. And the cost of filming sustainably, in some instances it can be quite a lot cheaper. The stuff that Steve was saying about, the different models of, power, for example, which we know at the moment it's a massive worry about everyone about the cost of power. But some aspects will invariably, in terms of resource and time, and will be more expensive. So in a way, production companies are being put in a position where there's an expectation and I think a desire from a lot of them, but the production budgets are kind of not growing sometimes in the way to support that. So Steve, what has been your experience of that? What are you finding out? What's the economy like where you are?
I think it's mixed. I mean, I think generally speaking, if you can save carbon, you're largely going to be saving money. I think we also need to think of some of the new working practices that came through COVID. So, for example, working remotely is going to be better for the environment than kind of commuting and traveling to offices. Things like having the confidence to use local crews. So instead of flying crew from the UK to another country, through COVID, we've actually learned that there are some great crews. They're not just British crews. Actually, there are great crews all over the world who are really talented, and of course, they have the added advantage of they have local knowledge, and also you're supporting a local economy. So there's more than just a carbon sustainability thing there. But also, there are regional variations. So one of the things that we're discovering is in the UK, some of the infrastructure that might exist in the southeast to allow you to do things more sustainably could be more challenging in other parts of the country. So there's some systemic changes that we need. For example, I know a project that's going to be filming in Lancashire, and it's more of a challenge getting electric vehicles being more readily available in Lancashire than there are in the southeast. So that can be a challenge sometimes. But we are addressing these things slowly. I mean, things have to happen further and faster. I mean, one of the things that I would say is over the last 18 months, I've seen a huge acceleration in the UK. Out of COP, all the UK broadcasters committed to something called the Climate Content Pledge, which I think was a significant move that is committing to going further and faster to kind of inform audiences, which is really good. But it's also about how we work collaboratively in the industry, how we share data in the industry, I think is important. And also a recognition that the broadcasters have got these very challenging personal net zero commitments that are public. They've signed up to things like the science-based targets. So it's going to be publicly embarrassing for them if they don't make those targets. And the only way they're going to do that is if all the stakeholders, all production companies and people go on that journey with them. So I can see accelerated effort now from broadcasters to try and help support the production community to go with them. And the other thing I just want to say, of course, is what's been easier in the UK is Albert has been supported by all the broadcasters. And of course, they directly fund content, which means that they can make it mandatory for productions to do Albert. Otherwise, you don't get your production budget paid for. It's more challenging in the film industry because there isn't the same funding model. So actually that's where I think we need to find ways of encouraging sustainable production and carbon footprinting. I know that the BFI, I think, as part of their sort of policy now, like with diversity, they make sort of sustainability one of those criteria is if you're going to access public funds for filmmaking. So it is starting to happen. But I think it's in the film industry sector that is a bit more challenging still.
Thank you, Steve. Manel, I was really interested to hear you saying that, part of the work that you've been doing, you've actually been going into schools. Could you, which I really like the idea of really trying to kind of get to our future film and program makers at an early age, who are often, I always find with children and young adults, they're actually so much more switched on about the importance of this. And they see a lot less barriers to it as well. They're almost like, yeah, of course we should be doing it. Like, how do we do it? So could you just talk us through a little bit about why you decided to kind of start doing that and kind of what's come out of that? Because I'm quite interested in that aspect of it. Like yourself, I'm an educator, but in higher education. So I'm getting, it's the 18 to 24-year-olds. So would you mind chatting to us a little bit about that?
Yes, well, we are facing a generation that is quite aware about these issues. The problem is usually that they don't know how to solve them, and especially they are working on productions and they face so many problems that this one finally is an added one, and it's the last one to solve for them because they have other priorities. So we want to reverse the priorities in that sense, because actually doing a production, and you know that this really well, actually is doing a production is thinking of sustainability by itself. When you do a production plan, for example, you are already thinking in terms of economy, in terms of sustainability of resources, independently from other matters like, well, the ones that we are mentioning, like environmental issues or social aspects, etc. So we try to include all this perspective on this consideration, on this very first considerations about doing a production. Obviously for them, it's a different way to think, but I think little by little they are assuming this is part of their job. Fortunately, they have new references in the market, in the professional market, and we have the consultants. We have also the new calls of the public funds institutions offering advantages for this kind of productions. So they are right now very aware of that, and this is something we try to underline in order to help them to do this reflection. At the same time, in the last years, the audiovisual production is something that that has been taught in schools. This is well, I remember at my age, it was impossible. We learned in the field of art, we learned how to paint something or write a poem, but we never faced audiovisual productions. Now there are specific subjects in school. We have even a program in Catalonia, very linked to our university. There is a researcher in our research group leading this movement. It's called Cinema in Course, but actually it's not only about cinema. They also produce other formats. So they introduce new methodologies to shoot, to produce in schools, and we receive all this generation is really aware about that. So we are trying to do a transversal job, trying to connect all these different education phases, let's say that, or education levels. And I think the culture is changing a bit, but we still have lots of things to do.
Thank you. That's
Could I just
interesting. Yeah, please jump
sorry,
in.
I was going to say, could I just jump in off the back of that and just to sort of say, again, in the UK, we're very lucky in that there's this education partnership that Albert have. I think it's now 46 universities and film schools, including Edge Hill, that are part of this partnership. So helping the next generation of filmmakers understand. And the great thing from my experience of working with some students is that generally they are more open-minded. They're not set in their ways of how they work because, you know, they're coming into the industry fresh. So being able to show them these new sustainable production techniques is really good. And of course, they get it, you know, that they're a generation that really understand it. So they're committed. So that gives me a lot of hope, actually, that the next generation will accelerate the kind of rate of change that we're going to see.
And adding to that, is this beyond education, like innovation, you know, IMSD, like in research is getting also there. There's companies like, especially in the VFX industry, that are making post-production way more efficacy and efficient, and is allowing for like shorter work schedules for, you know, people, which is sustainable in terms of social, but also in like going to places, using lighting, using like makeup and costumes. So I think the two things we should be looking at is not only education in terms of newer generations, which of course, but also in the innovation aspects of the industry.
Absolutely. I mean, myself and Elka, you know, we were quite lucky. We were early adopters of the educational partnership for BAFTA Albert, the television production management program that we lead. We engaged in that quite early because we're quite plugged into industry, and we were hearing you know, people who are working on productions were talking about Albert, and we were like, what's that? What we need to know about that. It's an incredibly well run organization, and the materials that they supply to me as an educator have really made it. There is not very much heavy lifting, and they're very realistic about that. For some educators, they can do whole modules which are just based on it, but for others, they can just include it in modules and kind of thread it all the way through. And for me, as a lecturer, it's been just wonderful, because, you know, when we first started like delivering it, nobody knew what it was about, and there wasn't very much interest in it. I would say almost at an institutional level, there wasn't very much interest in it. And the students were kind of like, oh, yeah, this is quite good. And I remember it turned around about 4 years ago. One of our students went to do a work placement at quite a big production company that does a lot of stuff for the BBC, BBC 1 and 2 slate. And she was in a production office and, you know, doing the usual things that runners do, making coffee and, you know, photocopying. And they said, oh, we've got to do this BAFTA Albert thing for this pitch we're doing now. And she said, oh, I know about that. I've used the carbon calculator. And they were like, right, that's your job now. And you can now see there's this real turnaround where it's becoming a skill set that apprentice filmmakers and program makers want to have. And BAFTA Albert's work on that has definitely supported us in that. And also the fact that the students get a qualification as well when they're doing the scheme with us. So they really feel that they have that knowledge, and that the teaching deck that BAFTA Albert supply is really, really good quality. So from an education kind of perspective for us, again, yeah, we feel that the work's really starting to gain some momentum. So it's been really, really good. One of the things I just wanted to pick up on, Marta, I don't know whether you want to talk about this, is what's coming through really clearly from the work that you and Manel are doing is there's a social responsibility thread. This is not just research. And one of the things I'm really interested in is how we as researchers, is our work starting to be more informed with our feelings of personal and social responsibility? And I guess, how does that affect us as researchers? You know, whereas maybe previously we were thinking we just had to be quite analytical, we have to be critical thinkers. And I can hear from talking to both of you that, you know, that this is something that you deeply and passionately believe needs to happen and that is informing your research. So would you mind talking to us a little bit about how that's informing the work you're doing?
Manel, do you want to take it, or?
Go ahead, Marta. Yeah.
Okay. Let me see if I understand the question. Do you mean how we as researchers try to talk about these things, or what are the things that we're seeing that are happening in the industry? Like, how are we, you know, approaching it, or what are our outcomes?
I guess my question was more, do you feel a certain sense of social responsibility with the work you're doing? As researchers, sometimes our work might be terribly important to us and the small research community who are interested in our discipline. But to me, it seems now there's something larger than all of us. And I'm wondering how much that's impacting your research, if at all. It may not be. I'm just really curious.
No, 100%. I think, as you said, right, we make many articles that sometimes, you know, it's going to be read by the same people that you probably quoted, and that's the reality of academia. Sometimes the articles just get read by other academics. We do have a very intrinsic connection with the work we're doing, because I think the way we have understand this research particularly is being very practical and very much to push and do advocacies for the practitioners. And so we're also very aware, because we worked in this industry, of how many hours go into it. That, you know, people think movies are done like this, but it's 18 hours or 12 hours of people working there's women industry now that, there's covered maternities. There have been certain scandals about it, of like how few actresses, at least in Spain, didn't get hired because they were pregnant at the time. And so I think also the fact that, when we see a fiction on, I particularly now on my thesis work on mental disorders, and there's always the Asperger kid, which is a white heterosexual man. And so we've seen these kind of patterns coming on and on and on again, both in on screen and off screen. And so I think we wanted to make people aware of that, make people like on the industry that it's not good enough for you to just have a female on to get the quota. It's like, have a female on the direction, because it also changes such like the gaze, like we move from the male gaze to the female gaze, for instance, or with minorities, we don't fall into stereotypings. And so it actually enriches the production, and that's what we are trying to communicate. And I think because of our research is so practical, we have a very much a thrive for it. Said that it's not always easy, and big productions companies, they want names, and sometimes those names are well-known people, and they tend to be male because it's been very male dominant field or very white dominant field. There's we had prepared videos, but it's completely fine. But there's this video on Vox Media that talked about the yellow face and how still right now we have Scarlett Johansson playing an Asian character because the production company wants a big name rather than betting for an Asian actor with background that is not well known, or that is well known but it's it's not Scarlett Johansson. So we're trying to push that into the industry, kind of criticize it as well as in the articles, but it definitely is something that we have been trying to push. And I don't know if it's because in this new kind of context, there is more talked about it. With the Me Too movement, the Oscars so wide, I think there is a push, and I think we're jumping on not only on that trend, but because we also live in it. I think. I don't know if you, Manel, want to add something.
Yeah, well,
I'm very passionate about it.
You explained it perfectly. I would say that we work on two types of research. This kind of analytic research, where we take from the productions the relevant elements to talk about green shooting, sustainable productions, representation of characters, etc. And this kind of research tries to raise awareness about that and to have an impact from the point of view of the reading of the productions, and we push the industry to change from this theoretical perspective. But we try to promote another kind of research, which is the applied research. So we try to connect with other agents, and we try to do a sort of creative research around. When I mentioned this film we are producing around the climate change assembly here in Spain, this wants to be a double project, a project of production, but at the same time a project of experimentation and research by itself. So the project tries to apply all what we have explored around the concept of green shooting. We are working with eco consultants. We are also working with the students. So the students are the crew of the production. The theme obviously is sustainability, and we also practice professionally the work of production. We do that through our principles of sustainability. So this is a kind of research we want to promote as well. The research based on creating, on doing, on producing tangible results that can be an example for the rest of the industry in order to help them to promote these values. So I would say we have these two different layers of the same concept of research.
Yeah, it sounds incredibly rich. Yes, Steve, you had something to add there.
I'd just love to know more about, because having made a film about the UK Climate Assembly, I'm just curious to know more about the film and really looking forward to hopefully seeing it when it comes out. So is the Spanish Assembly a very similar process to the UK Assembly?
It is similar in some ways, but it's completely different in others. We are aware that you were in this process and you made the film. And we would like to share a bit more with you, probably when the film is a bit more, well, probably finished more than, because at this moment we are in the process of production, and we need to even preserve some questions of privacy of the members of the assembly. But one of the main differences of the Spanish Assembly is that the Spanish Assembly was online. It was online until the last session. And the second one is they wanted to preserve the privacy, as I said before, of the members of the Assembly. We couldn't contact them beforehand. We couldn't have an access to them to talk further the subjects that appeared during the Assembly. And now it's when we have the opportunity to do that. We actually found like sort of excuse to start the plot of the Assembly, and we took this concept of the urban symphonies. You know, in cinema there is this movement 1 century ago about the urban symphonies, which apparently is very far from the idea of the environmental change. But thinking about that, the urban symphonies were celebrating the idea of the progress and the idea of technology, electrification, consumption. So 100 years after, we wanted to express how society changed. So we take this idea of symphony and we transform the concept to syntony, that has several acceptations. Symphony as a musical performance, of course, but syntony also as an agreement. So this is actually our excuse to start the film, finding the syntony between people to talk about climate change, but at the same time, it's a musical film. So we're gonna bring the arguments of the people participating in the assembly, but at the same time, we're gonna have some musical parts explaining the results of this reflections. So this is more or less what I can explain at this moment, because maybe Marta, you can add something, but we are very limited with informations we can give, but we'll be happy to share some of them a bit later when the film is going to be in the post-production.
I can just see that Elka's got a hand up for a question. Actually, Elka, would you like to jump in?
Yes.
Only if I don't interrupt too much the flow, because I can remember that question and can ask that later. If you would rather, Marta, do you want to say anything else?
No, I think Manel explained it perfectly. The only thing that I would add is that our students, well, that it's a female-led documentary, and then that our students are creating a special guide just for documentary genre on how to be sustainable, and it has been done through mixing, BAFTA Albert training, EcoProd guidelines, and Earth Angel guidelines, all the guidelines possible, but making it for documentary. But that's the only thing that I personally would add, because as Manel said, there's so much we can share, unfortunately.
Great. One of the things, so I'm working on a similar project as you both. So we've been doing climate assemblies locally and used local community-led television basically to film it all. And we're in the process of editing at the moment, and then basically disseminating. We've disseminated a little bit already. We've had one screening, which went really well. The audience basically spontaneously just erupted into conversation about climate change, and I ended up taking lots of notes instead of us having a Q&A. They really wanted to talk about climate change, which was lovely. But one of the things that I found was how important it was to not stay within my silo in a way, in terms of knowledge and approach. And I was wondering if all three of you can actually say something about the need to be really open to other people and other disciplines and other points of views in the process of either making these programs or indeed, researching them.
Yeah, Steve, shall we start
Shall
with you?
Shall I start?
Yeah, because obviously you've come from a traditional Graham Norton, top-tiered broadcasting background, and you're probably having to have some quite challenging conversations and when you're going in consulting. So how have you found that's worked?
I think it's working well. I mean, I think generally people are keen to support this. They know there's a problem, and when people kind of kind of get engaged, they're keen to do their part. I mean, it comes back to education. I think education is crucial, and whether that's education with a big E or whether it's slightly more subtle, it doesn't really matter. But I think knowledge is always really key. And I agree, it's important not to sort of be in silos. I think one of the things that the UK Climate Assembly kind of did is recognise that there isn't necessarily a one fits all solution. Different communities will have different solutions. If you are a rural community, I live in a very rural community where public transport is a huge problem for us, and we're a farming community as well. So the kind of solutions that sort of the communities where I live are going to be very different to if you live in an urban centre where you've got much better access to public transport. But things like air pollution and traffic congestion and all these things might be problematic. One of the things that I love so much about the Climate Assembly film that we did is we were able to tell some very personal stories. So for example, the story of Amy, who was a single mum who lives in social housing that was heated by coal. And again, we forget, many of us, that even in 2022, many of our homes are still using what I would describe as Victorian technology to heat them, because we haven't adapted. And so again, solutions that will be right for those are going to be different for other people. So I think it's really important that we have to stay open to this, that we have to have different forms of conversations, and we can all learn. I continue to learn all the time from conversations I have with people, and I think that's important.
So we're having to constantly stay quite agile in our thinking as we kind of continue with our practice and have to have conversations. Elke, I'm really interested. Obviously, I know I kind of have seen a little bit how the sausage is made with your project, but I do think it's a really interesting example of a research project that really engages with community, because I mean, my belief is that community is how we're going to get all this done, really. Would you mind talking us through a little bit what the project was, how it was funded, and what the outputs are? Because I think it would probably be of interest to people on this talk.
Yeah, so basically it all started with actually Steve's film, which was offered to different communities as a free screening, and I was in the process of organizing screening for a community group called Love Wavertree, and basically one of the directors, Ian Harvey, forwarded me Steve's email, and then I got in touch with Steve and we screened it, and then Steve said, oh, why don't you run some local assemblies? And so I pitched that to the Love Wavertree directors, and they said, yes, let's do that. And then it was meant to be just something that we do locally, and we went to the National Lottery for funding originally, and the National Lottery basically sent us packing because we didn't have the right bank account, which tells you something about, you know, some of the barriers of getting money for things like that. But then a public funding project through research became available through the British Academy. The British Academy is basically one of the big funders in the UK for any kind of research. That was shared via so Edge Hill University has SustainNet, which is a community of both researchers, but also, you know, people actually working in the community, all based around climate change and sustainability. And so I applied for that and was able to get Belinda Tyrrell from the University of Liverpool involved as well. And she is, her background is policy research, and she's worked a lot with communities. And we were successful. We couldn't quite believe it because it was all so rapid, basically. So our project now is a collaboration between the University of Liverpool, us as Edge Hill, and then Love Wavertree is also very heavily involved. They basically have coordinated the outreach with the community, which has been fantastic. So yeah, we conducted 4 assemblies. We filmed them, and we're now disseminating them, and we're kind of trying to understand how to spread the word in a way, you know, about the community action that's already happening. And one of the things that happened as a result of us conducting the assemblies is there's so much going on in Liverpool. It's unreal. There's so many small scale community groups who are doing enormous amount of work in the area. That includes people getting together as neighborhoods and greening up alleys. It includes people coming together to do litter picks. It includes people basically caring for parks. You know, there's all these different kind of projects. So we filmed those as well. And Liverpool has a real problem with cars. The whole infrastructure was designed in the 60s to be basically designed for cars. It was meant to have lots and lots of motorways through the city. And so as a result of that, that has really affected active travel. So there is now community groups who are really campaigning for the use of active travel, but who are also offering free cycle rides. So we filmed that as well. And it all came together basically as a result of us organizing these assemblies. And then people started talking to us about what they are already doing and what they're involved with. And then we basically filmed that. And our hope is that by showcasing this, more and more people will become involved. But that's where we're not yet at. So the outcomes includes 4 30-minute films and 4 10-minute films, as well as some really nice social media friendly snippets. And then we've given 4 papers, and we will write 3 articles, and there will be a report. It's quite a lot.
It is. And a really intriguing approach to research. You know, it's really stretched you as a practitioner. Do you think you will continue with research projects that incorporate all these different elements? And is this a model that you can maybe roll out and mentor other researchers in? Because what I'm hearing here is researchers who are really hitting every target, really. They're working with assemblies, they're filming, they're also doing those outputs, those more traditional journal. Do we think that maybe this is a good model for research on sustainability?
Yeah, that's where my question came from earlier about the kind of, you know, having to be quite agile and being quite open to other disciplines, because I think that way we can get a very holistic understanding of things. And I have to admit, I have never in my life learned as much as on this project, and it's been brilliant.
Steve, your hand's up. Did you have something to add or ask?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'm really looking forward to sort of seeing some of these kind of resources when they're finished. That's really exciting. But talking about the things that you were talking about leads me to want to talk about something called action storytelling. And there's some fantastic work that's been done from Dr. Chris DeMare at King's College in London around this. So transforming the stories we tell about climate change from issue to action. And I'm just going to read some of the sort of findings because I think they're really relevant and they talk to exactly what you've been doing up there, which is up to 98% of environmental news stories tend to be negative. And the conventional wisdom is the greater awareness, concern, or even fear of climate change leads to behavior change. And what the research is saying, the opposite is true. It's our actions which change our beliefs. And this happens through a process of self-justification and self-persuasion, which escalate. So the more actions taken, the deeper the engagement and sense of agency. So what's really key is knowing how to act around climate change. So the advice really is that rather than telling people what to do, climate storytelling should really be supporting people in discovering how to act. And one important source of agency is learning from the actions of others. So I think the kind of stuff that you're amplifying really that's going on in local communities is so important in solving this problem.
Yeah, same thing. I'm really excited. I was unfortunately unable to go to the screening, but I think one of the things that I really like, that's another thread that's emerging, is working with young adults as part of production teams and as part of this research, because, you know, I hate it saying that, you know, they're the future, but it is their future. And getting them involved in these projects seems to me to be, it's kind of like a virtuous circle of they're working on production, they're becoming excited. In Elka's case, they're getting to work on some wonderful research and plug into community action groups, but also they are feeling part of a solution, because as Steve has said, so much of the discussions around climate change are quite frankly terrifying, and they frighten us, and they just make us kind of want to put our head under the covers, but we can't do that. But this is where I think Steve's point about storytelling is so important, that when we see assemblies and community action groups, and when we see storylines in soap operas, in a way that's another lens to put on it, which feels slightly less apocalyptic. And I do think that's the way the needle needs to move, because people do get very fatigued, and also there's lots of quite frightening things happening in the world anyway to take our attention. So I really like the approaches that we're hearing. We're just after 2 o'clock now. This has gone by so fast. It's been so brilliant. I don't know whether this would be I don't know if any of you guys have got any questions to ask of each other, or if indeed there are any questions from any of our audience that are here today. Steve saying he might have to leave. He's got an urgent issue. Okay, Steve, absolutely no problem whatsoever.
Before I go, does anyone have any questions that they wanted to directly put to me? Because I'm happy to try and answer that. Okay,
over to the floor. Has anybody, any of our attendees got any direct questions for Steve before he slips off? You can put them in the chat if you would like. That's absolutely fine.
Liam, you can also just ask the question if that's easier.
Yeah.
Rather than typing.
I can see him. Did you have a question?
That's good.
Did you have a question, Liam?
But can I say thank you to Steve?
Okay.
Yeah, thanks. I do. But if anyone wanted to ask Steve something, I'll let them go first.
Well, so far we haven't had any questions. I think we've covered such a lot of ground already, and that's absolutely fine. I mean, thank you so much for giving us your time, Steve. It has been amazing, and I am going to be reaching out to you to chat to you, because I'm so excited and interested in everything you've been saying today, and I'm sure that the rest of the panel and the audience feel the same. So thank you, and good luck with your emergency. I hope
thank you. Sorry. Thank you.
No,
thank you.
Regards from me and regards from Manel and I as well, Steve.
So thank you. Yes. yeah,
Good seeing you all. Good luck. Enjoy the conversation as it carries on.
Oh, thanks, Steve. That's great.
Thank you, Steve. Bye.
Hi, Liam. So, yeah, so thanks for joining us today. So, did you have a question or an observation that you wanted to share?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask really about something. So, Marta, you mentioned early on about punishing behavior, and this could be construed as punishing behavior, I suppose. If, say, sustainability was to get even more prominence and maybe alongside IMDb scores for the quality of a film or a TV program, there could be like sustainability scores. That could be a very blunt instrument. It could be wrong in a few ways, but it could also maybe generate a lot of good as people were pressured to make their production more sustainable. So can you ever see that happening, and would it be a good or a bad thing?
Wow, that is a very interesting question, Liam. Thank you for bringing it up. I think it could be something that would be implemented. I don't know if in terms of points, but definitely in terms of policies and certain marks that productions would have to reach. It really depends on how it would be approached, and I guess it would depend on if these regulations are just within the channel or the production company, or if it responds to the ministry, or if it responds to even a bigger entity like European Union, although I know the UK is out right now, but even having to reply to the European or any other big institutional European assembly. I think it could go either way. It could be very good because obviously, as you mentioned, it could change behavior and it could strive for sustainability practices, but also punishment because why we, certain channels don't arrive because, as Perelandra rightfully so said, because of budget or because of lack of, resources. So first, I think it should be measured. So are we a big company? Are we a big, I think if we make that policy, there should be different policies for different things. Like you cannot apply, I think one of the main and tricky things that we have in our industry is that one solution doesn't fit everyone because there's so much diversity from the genre, from the sizing of from the budget, from who is funding. So I could see potentially this happening, but then it should be extremely well detailed. And I think this is where research and think tanks and institutions should generally sit down and break down all of that. But I think certain things should be met, and I think others should be more flexible from my perspective, because at the end is what we said. It is something about education. It's about wanting to change. It's about trying to reduce our own climate anxiety, if it makes sense. So I don't know if it really replies to your question, but I think it should be, but in a very broad manner.
No, that's great. Thanks. Yeah, as you say, there's a lot of nuance to unpick there, and it would be a very maybe blunt instrument if it wasn't done like that. So thank you very much.
Certainly in the television industry, increasingly you're seeing broadcasters being very proud of their green credentials. And I mean, there is an aspect, obviously, of greenwashing that we always have to be conscious of. But what we're seeing increasingly is, if you go on the Albert website, there's lots of case studies of, Sky documentaries and, Poldark interchanging sets with Queen Victoria. It has, within the television industry, for some productions, become a bragging right and something, that they're quite proud of. So putting those credentials on as the credentials of the film, I actually think that there would be that, peer pressure is actually often can be a good pressure with these kind of things. It can really move things along. So yeah, in a way, it could be construed as some kind of punishment, but particularly because I think the film industry has got that bit further to go. I would think that this could be something that's got. I think that's quite a good idea, Liam. I don't think it's the worst idea that I've heard at all, because, you know, for all the good work that happens within film and television production, we know that there's just still so much more. And I know some of the stuff that Marta's picked up on in terms of, you know, inclusivity, diversity. There's long ways to go. So I think if there were almost ratings on productions that were made, I think as well, as consumers, it would allow us to choose what we put our money behind. So I would rather go and see a film, and I'm someone who loves film. Obviously, I work with film scholars. But I would still rather put my money behind a film where actually I know that everyone got paid fairly, the working hours were good, and it was as sustainable as it could be. And I agree with Marta, it could be that there's a sliding scale. We can't put the expectations onto smaller production companies that we can put onto, you know, Netflix or, you know, some of the bigger companies. So it could be that there is a sliding scale there, but I think that's a really clever idea. So yeah, definitely one to think about and yeah, take away. So thank you.
No worries. Yeah,
And to
just
add,
say to work, it would have to be, as you say, it would have to be somewhere where people see it like an IMDb or something else. Yeah, or somewhere where journalists can pick it up and kind of share that out, so we can apply our principles when we decide what to watch or what to go and see. Yeah.
And to add on that, I think there's a lot of research already made on how certain production companies that are big ones, I'm not going to say names, but the research is published, but that have been caught doing greenwashing. And especially they've been caught because these ratings were existing. So that also actually can avoid, you know, those type of red purple washing, greenwashing kind of phenomena. And at the same time, I think you guys raised a very important question, which is audience. I think we still have a very unknown audience on like what is happening in this industry. So, you know, right now I see Gen Z going to vintage stores because they don't want to contribute to the fast fashion. There's criticizing to like these big fast fashion companies, or, you know, as Steve previously mentioned, people trying to go vegan a day, or, you know, vegetarian, alternative to milks. But I haven't still quite seen audiences claiming and wanting a green film because it's so undercover. And I think it's due to different things, right? It's the glamorous think of the film industry that obviously it attracts more attention than the actual production, the secrecy behind the scenes to not reveal certain aspects of it. So I think one of the things we might want to focus as film practitioners is kind of sending that message to audiences of like, you can claim for a green film or a green television production.
Wonderful. So Elka makes a brilliant point in the chat, and she said, you know, we were talking about this. She said, but what about countries that don't have public service broadcasters and where regulation is very limited? I guess then we're kind of relying on them to maybe perform above and beyond their kind of competitors. Do you want to unpack that question a little bit more, Elka? So what are your thoughts there?
I mean, at the end of the day, the biggest industry is still the US, and the US has, yes, it has a public service broadcasting service, but it's totally underfunded and basically relatively insignificant in the US as a broadcaster. And one of the things that strikes me is that we were all talking about, you know, in the UK and Spain, it's the public money that really incentivizes this. The public money has also led on developing the educational tools and all of that. So what happens in countries where, or do you even know what is happening in the US in terms of this at the moment? Because, you know, there are clearly things happening in terms of telling the stories, as Don't Look Up indicates. But what incentives? Why would a US conglomerate, and even if it's just one of the subsidiaries of the conglomerate, why would they buy into this? Because so far it's all been about making as much money as you can, basically, and it's not been about an enormous amount of social responsibility, I think. Yeah.
I think the question about the public service is absolutely pertinent here, and it's something we have to take into account. Obviously, having a strong public service can help, but at the same time, I think we need to change the culture on that as well. I'm going to explain that. I think any broadcasting system is offering a public service. Any of them, they are maybe not public because they don't have the government's money, but the communication system, the broadcasting, the production for massive audiences should be a public service, and we should understand that as a public service. So this is something we need to change in the mentality of the broadcasters and the producers. They are working for society in general. They are not working just to reach more audiences. So as they are having this impact in society, they have to be engaged on these social issues. They have to be responsible with all these aspects, and obviously sustainability is something they need to have in their agenda. So probably we need to push as well to change a bit the mentality of some private services, because they are offering at the same time a public service for society in general.
Wonderful. Okay, so we're just coming to the end of the session now. So obviously, I don't know if anybody's got any additional questions to ask, or if our panel would like to make any kind of final thoughts. It might be a nice way to wrap it up, might be to say, you know, what are your hopes for maybe the next 5 years for this work? Could I hand over to you guys to let us know what your hopes are for?
I think for us is to trying to implement as much as we can these green shooting policies in our university level, and if we want to be super I say this hopeful, bring it to the ministry so that it can be applied into other universities. So I know right now we're just applying it in a few courses, but hopefully it becomes like a subject that it's mandatory in film and television studies. And also we want to still research on this topic, on the technologically advances that can reduce environmental impact, and policies that can reinforce better work schedules and health well-being for the people in the industry, and obviously push those advocacies for, at least for our country in Spain right now. I think that's what, I mean, it's very, very ambitious, but that's what we, I think, want to move towards.
Oh, that
like ambitious.
Yeah, we would like also to have a transnational impact. I think we are working in, especially with this issue, at a very national level, because obviously the broadcasting systems are national. But I think we need to go beyond. We have to get some alliances, share good practices, work on common policies. And we were even thinking about doing European research on that, because we think maybe with this alliance with other universities, production companies, public broadcasting services, maybe we can have some more transnational results. And this is something we had as a goal in our agenda as well.
Nelka, what are your hopes now? You've just come to the end of a research project, which seems very hopeful. So what are you hoping to see in the next 5 years?
So I'm hoping that I can continue by getting a larger grant and rolling it out across the city, not just in the area where I live. And then I want to basically jump onto Manuel's bandwagon and say, yeah, it would be great if actually there was like a way of coming together as as researchers and as program makers internationally. And maybe that's something for us to chat about once this is finished today. So
maybe
because at the end of the day, it's us.
New assembly. Who knows? That would be awesome, wouldn't it? Well, listen, thank you so much to our panel for your contributions, and obviously to Elka for arranging this. It's been so enjoyable and very, very interesting. So I will give you all a clap. Obviously, as with all of these, this has been recorded. So if anyone joined us late, I know a few people joined us late. If you want to watch any of the earlier chat, then that will be made available for you.